The Texas sun beat down on a nightmare made of smoke and ash. What was once a cabin was now a funeral pyre. And inside that fire, the outlaws had left a young woman to die. But they made a mistake, a fatal one. They didn't know who she was. They didn't know who her father was. And they didn't know that the fire they started wouldn't kill her. It would forge her into something far more dangerous than any of them could possibly imagine. Because that young woman, Emily Blackwood, was the daughter of a U.S. Marshal. But he wasn't just any Marshal. He was James Blackwood. And before he was James Blackwood, he was known by another name, a name whispered on the plains with a mix of fear and respect. He was the son of a Comanche chief, and that same warrior blood, that same ancient fire, was about to wake up inside his daughter. The men who burned her home were about to learn that some fires can never be put out. They just transform. Let's rewind the clock just a few hours. Spring had come to the Texas Hill Country. The land was alive with bluebonnets, a sea of blue and purple waving under the big sky. For 24-year-old Emily Blackwood, it felt like a new beginning. She'd built this life with her own two hands, on the small piece of land her mother, Sarah, had left her. The cabin wasn't big, but it was strong. It was hers, a symbol of her independence, a trait she'd inherited from both her American mother and her enigmatic father. Most folks in Willow Creek, the town 15 miles south, knew James Blackwood as a U.S. Marshal. They said he could track a ghost through a sandstorm. They told stories of how he brought in the worst of the worst without ever breaking a sweat. But they didn't know the whole story. They didn't know he was born to the Comanche, the son of a powerful chief named White Eagle. They didn't know he'd been adopted by the Blackwood family as a boy, a living treaty of peace between two worlds. He walked in both, respected in each, but maybe never truly belonging to either. Emily had his raven black hair and his olive skin, but her eyes were her mother's, a piercing, stormy blue. She knew both sides of her heritage, but as tensions grew between settlers and the tribes, she learned to keep the Comanche part of her quiet. It was a secret she kept tucked away, like a hidden knife. That morning she was drawing water from the well when the world went silent. The birds stopped singing. Her mare, Penny, stomped nervously in her corral. It was a deep, unnatural quiet that made the hairs on her neck stand on end. She set the bucket down and reached for the Winchester she always kept close. Her father had taught her that survival out here wasn't about being the strongest. It was about being the first to sense danger. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice hard and steady, a perfect imitation of her father's. "I'm armed." Silence. Then a voice slithered out from the tree line, a gravelly, mocking voice. "Well now, that's a big rifle for a little lady all by her lonesome." A man stepped out of the shadows. He was layered in trail dust, with a mean, scraggly beard and eyes as cold and dead as a snake's. Emily kept the rifle leveled. "State your business." The man took another step, and two more riders emerged from the trees behind him. They were armed to the teeth. "The name's Jackson Cole," he said with a smile that didn't touch his eyes. "And your business is our business." Emily had heard the name. Jackson Cole, a hired gun, a man who worked for the big cattle barons, the ones who were swallowing up all the small ranches and homesteads. People said he used fire and fear to clear the land for his employers. "I have a legal deed to this land," Emily said, standing her ground, "signed and registered in Willow Creek." Cole just chuckled. That same humorless, grating sound. "Funny thing about paper, little lady." He took another step, his hand hovering over the Colt at his hip. "It burns." Her heart was hammering against her ribs, but she didn't let it show. Fear was blood in the water for men like this. "My father is U.S. Marshal James Blackwood," she said, playing the only card she had. "He'll be visiting any day." One of the other men, a lanky fellow with a cruel mouth, spat on the ground. "Blackwood's busy, all the way up in Fort Worth, chasing shadows. By the time he gets word you're in trouble, we'll be long gone, and this land will be ours." The cold certainty in his voice chilled her to the bone. They knew. They knew exactly where her father was. This wasn't just some random act of intimidation. This was planned. "We're authorized to offer you $50 for this property," Cole said, his voice dripping with false reason. "A fair price." It's not for sale, Emily snapped. Cole's fake smile vanished. This ain't a negotiation. He let the threat hang in the air, thick and heavy like the coming storm. Emily sighted down the barrel of the Winchester, right at the center of his chest. Get off my land. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then Cole raised his hands in mock surrender. All right, all right. We'll be back tomorrow for your final answer. She watched them ride away, their shapes swallowed by the trees. But she knew they weren't coming back tomorrow. They were coming back tonight. She didn't waste a second. She threw a saddle on Penny, stuffing supplies into her saddlebags. Food, water, ammunition. She had to get to Willow Creek. She had to telegraph her father, warn the sheriff. But something Cole had said echoed in her mind. His casual smile, the deadness in his eyes. A cold dread washed over her. It wasn't just about the land, was it? There was something else, something personal. She was just cinching the last strap on her saddlebag when she heard it. The thunder of hoofbeats. Not 3 riders this time. It sounded like a small army. She swung into the saddle, kicking Penny toward the dense forest on the far side of her property. It was her only chance. The trees would give her cover, but she didn't make it halfway across the clearing. Crack! A bullet screamed past her ear, so close she felt the heat of its passage. Penny shrieked and reared, nearly throwing her. There she is! Don't let her get away! Emily leaned low, whispering Comanche words into her mare's ear, urging her on. Another shot rang out, and a searing pain exploded in her upper arm. Blood soaked through her sleeve, hot and sticky. She reached the tree line, weaving Penny through the thick underbrush. Behind her, the men were cursing, their bigger horses struggling in the dense woods. For a moment, she thought she might lose them. Then Penny's hoof caught a hidden root. The world turned upside down. Emily was thrown, hitting the ground with a sickening thud that drove the air from her lungs. Dazed, she tried to stand, but a sharp, agonizing pain shot up from her ankle. It was broken. Penny was on her feet, trembling. Go! Emily gasped, slapping the mare's flank. Go! Penny bolted, disappearing into the forest, leaving Emily alone. She dragged herself behind a fallen log, pulling the revolver from her belt. Her father's gun. If they wanted her, they'd pay in blood. The first rider crashed through the trees. Emily fired. The man screamed, clutching his shoulder as he tumbled from his horse. She's over there! The little witch shot me! Bullets splintered the log around her. She fired again, catching another man in the thigh. 2 shots left. The odds were impossible. She was out of time. As she prepared to make her last stand, a blinding pain erupted at the back of her head. One of them had circled around. The world dissolved into a dizzying swirl of color and darkness. Rough hands dragged her out from behind the log. Through a haze of pain, she saw Jackson Cole standing over her, his face a mask of annoyance and cruel victory. You got spirit, he said, then backhanded her across the face. Too bad spirit don't count for much out here. They tied her wrists and dragged her back to her cabin. They forced her to watch as they smashed everything, looted anything of value, and then doused the walls with lamp oil. Cole struck the match himself. He tossed it onto the porch with a casual flick, as if he were lighting a cigar. Flames roared to life, devouring her home, her memories, everything she had built. Now for you, Cole said, turning his dead eyes on her. Can't have any witnesses. The beating was brutal, methodical. They weren't just trying to hurt her, they were trying to erase her. She curled into a ball, protecting her head and stomach, just like her father had taught her. The world became a storm of pain, of splintering light, and the sickening thud of fists and boots. Through her swollen eyelids, she saw Cole draw a long, thin knife. Nothing personal, he said, crouching beside her. Just business. The blade plunged into her side. The pain was a white-hot nova, eclipsing everything else. It stole her breath, her thoughts, her will to fight. She tasted blood as he twisted the blade, then ripped it free. Let's go, he ordered his men. She won't last an hour. Grab the deed from the cabin once it burns down. She heard their horses fade into the distance. The world grew cold. The roar of the fire became a distant hum. As darkness closed in around her, she thought of her father. He had endured the Comanche warrior trials, rituals designed to push a man past the limits of pain and endurance. He had taught her how to quiet her mind, how to find strength when the body had given up. "Not today," she whispered through bloody lips. Her voice was a ghost of a sound. "I will not die today." With an effort that felt like lifting a mountain, she pressed her hand to the gaping wound in her side. She focused on her father's voice, whispering in her memory. Ancient words, Comanche words, words of survival. Hours bled into one another. She drifted in a twilight of pain and fever dreams. Night fell, and a deep chill settled into her bones. Sometime in the darkest hour, she felt a presence. Through blurred vision, she saw a shape at the edge of the clearing. A wolf. Its amber eyes seemed to glow, reflecting the dying embers of her home. It didn't move. It just watched her. A strange calm settled over her. She remembered her father's stories. The wolf's spirit, the guide between worlds, the symbol of survival. I understand, she thought. When dawn broke, the wolf was gone. Emily Blackwood pushed herself up from the dirt. She was battered. She was bleeding. But she was alive. She tore strips from her ruined dress, binding her wounds. The knife had missed anything vital. A miracle. Or maybe, as her father would say, the ancestors were watching over their own. From the ashes, she salvaged what she could. A blackened hunting knife, a canteen, and her father's compass, the brass case scorched, but the needle still pointing true north. As she stood there, swaying on her feet, her eyes fell upon a set of tracks in the soft earth. Cole and his men, heading south, toward Willow Creek. They had taken everything. They thought they had taken her life. Their confidence would be their undoing. A change had happened in the fire and the pain of that night. The homesteader's daughter had burned away, and in her place, something else had been forged, something harder, sharper. She looked at the smoking ruins one last time. Then she turned her face to the south. First she would heal. Then she would hunt. The journey should have killed her. The Texas wilderness is an unforgiving place, and Emily was a ghost walking through it. 3 days after the attack, a raging fever took hold. The knife wound in her side was infected, a constant, throbbing fire. Delirium became her companion, whispering lies in her ear, trying to lead her in circles until she collapsed for good. On the 4th day, her body gave out. She fell at the base of a huge limestone cliff, the sun beating down on her, the world fading to a blurry haze. This is it, she thought. This is the end. But through the shimmering heat, she saw a figure approaching. Tall, copper-skinned, a bow slung across his back. In her fevered mind, she thought it was her grandfather, White Eagle, come to guide her spirit to the other side. "Father," she rasped, her throat as dry as dust. The figure knelt beside her. His hands were weathered and ancient, but his touch was gentle as he examined her wounds. "Not your father, niece," the man said, his voice like the rumbling of distant thunder. "I am Matthew Running Elk, his brother in spirit. Matthew Running Elk." The name echoed from her father's stories. A great medicine man. James Blackwood's closest friend among the Comanche, a man who had refused the reservations and chosen to live alone, keeping the old ways alive. "Jackson Cole," Emily managed to whisper before the darkness claimed her completely. "He burned everything." When she woke, she was lying on a bed of soft furs inside a teepee. The air smelled of sage and cedar. Her wounds were clean, dressed with a poultice that drew the heat and the poison out of her flesh. Matthew sat by the fire singing. It was a low, guttural chant in the Comanche tongue, a healing song that seemed to seep into her very bones and knit them back together. He saw her eyes open. "You were hovering between the world," he said. "Your white mother's strength is in you, but it is White Eagle's blood that is saving you now." For 2 weeks, she was a prisoner of the fever. In her lucid moments, Matthew spoon-fed her a bitter, healing broth and told her stories. Stories of her father as a young man, before the marshal's badge, when he was just a warrior in training, the best of his generation. "Your father walked away from our path," Matthew said one evening, his dark eyes studying her face. "But he never forgot it. He kept you from it because he feared the hatred you would face. He wanted to protect you." Emily touched the bandage on her side. The pain was a dull ache now, a memory of the agony she had endured. He taught me enough to survive. Matthew nodded slowly. Survival is not enough, not for what you must do now. He looked at her, his gaze seeming to pierce right through her. You seek vengeance. It wasn't a question. Justice, Emily corrected, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. Cole and his men have to answer for what they did. To me and to all the others. Justice, vengeance, Matthew said, rising to his feet. Two edges of the same blade. He went to an old cedar chest and pulled out a bundle wrapped in deerskin. Your father left this with me many years ago. He said I would know when the time was right. He unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a beaded medicine pouch, a knife with a handle carved from bone, and a leather headband with a single, perfect eagle feather. These are the tools of a Comanche warrior, Matthew explained, his voice low and solemn. The pouch holds herbs to sharpen your senses, to let you see in the dark, to move without sound. The knife was forged by your grandfather from a fallen star, a piece of the sky. It will never lose its edge. And the headband, it marks you, as your father was marked, the daughter of a chief. Emily reached out a trembling hand. As her fingers touched the medicine pouch, a jolt, like a tiny spark of lightning, shot up her arm. I'm not worthy. Worthiness is not given, Matthew said sternly. It is earned. It is proven. Cole and the man he works for, they think you are a ghost. They think they face a wounded girl. They do not know they have awakened a spirit that has slept for a generation. Her training began the next day. It pushed her healing body to the absolute limit. Dawn began with prayers to the rising sun. Then came the physical work. Archery until her shoulders burned. Knife fighting until her hands were raw. Tracking, stalking, learning to move through the wilderness like a whisper on the wind. Matthew was a relentless teacher. Pain is a river, he would tell her when she stumbled, exhausted. Let it flow through you, but do not let it carry you away. Failure against these men is not an option. He taught her to read the story the land told. A bent blade of grass, a single misplaced stone. The subtle signs that separated the trail of an animal from the trail of a man trying to hide his passage. He taught her the language of the wild. In the evenings, he taught her the medicine ways. How to make poultices that could seal a wound, drafts that could keep her awake and alert for days, and poisons so subtle they mimicked natural illness. Not poison, he corrected her, medicine. The purpose determines whether it heals or harms. He taught her how to enter a trance, a state of pure focus where pain and fear became distant echoes. It was a place of power, a place her father had used to survive capture and torture at the hands of his enemies. On the final night, he led her to a sacred cave deep in the canyon. The walls were covered in ancient paintings, spirit animals, great hunts, forgotten battles. Tonight, he said, lighting a small fire, you will have your vision, you will face your fear, and you will be reborn. He threw a handful of herbs onto the fire. A thick, sweet smoke filled the cave. He began to chant. Emily sat before the fire, breathing it in, letting the song carry her away. The world fell away. Her spirit soared. She ran with the wolf pack, silent and deadly. She flew with the eagle, seeing the world laid out below her in perfect detail. She hunted with the mountain lion, a shadow with claws of steel. Then the vision shifted. She was standing in the ashes of her cabin. Cole and his men were there, their faces twisted into demonic masks. The old fear, the memory of the pain and helplessness, rose up to choke her. But this time, she didn't run. She called out, to her ancestors, to the spirits of the warriors who came before her. And they answered. Warriors on painted ponies appeared from the smoke, their faces grim, their weapons ready. At their head was a man she knew from her father's stories, White Eagle, her grandfather. The strength of our people is your strength, his voice echoed in her mind, not in words but in a feeling, a certainty. The courage of the hunter is your courage. One by one the spirits came to her. They gave her gifts, the eyes of the hawk, the speed of the antelope, the cunning of the coyote, and from White Eagle, a heart that would know no fear. When she came back to herself, dawn was breaking. Matthew was watching her. "The ancestors have blessed you," he said. Emily stood up. The ache in her side was gone. She felt a new kind of strength, a deep, quiet power that hummed in her blood. "They showed me who I am," she said. Matthew nodded. "Then you are ready." He brought her a bundle wrapped in elk skin. Inside was a tunic and leggings of the softest buckskin, dyed a deep indigo, the color of the sky just before night. There were moccasins beaded with a lightning pattern, and a bow made of horn and sinew that felt alive in her hands. She dressed. The clothes fit as if they were made for her. When she strapped the star metal knife to her thigh and slung the bow over her shoulder, she felt a final, fundamental shift inside her. The homesteader was gone. A warrior stood in her place. "Remember," Matthew cautioned, mixing sacred paints in a stone bowl. "Justice, not just blood." He painted her face. A white lightning bolt across her forehead, black rings around her eyes to sharpen her vision, red streaks down her cheeks for the blood her enemies would shed. "When they see this," Matthew said, "their hearts will feel a fear their minds cannot name." He gave her a pinto mare, swift and sure-footed, and he gave her a name. "Cole works for a man named Victor Harlan," he told her, "a cattle baron from the east. He wants to control all the water in this territory. Your land, your spring, is the key." Emily's eyes narrowed. "How do you know this?" A rare smile touched Matthew's lips. "The wind carries whispers, little eagle, and I listen." He told her that Cole would be in Willow Creek in 3 days for a cattle auction. "But you cannot face them alone," he warned. "Seek out a man named Samuel Wilson at the livery stable. He served with your father in the war. Show him your grandfather's knife. He will understand." With a final nod, Emily mounted the pinto. She was no longer just Emily Blackwood. She was the granddaughter of White Eagle. She was a hunter, and her prey was waiting in Willow Creek. For 2 days, she moved like a ghost. She avoided the main trails, using forgotten paths through the wilderness that only a Comanche would know. She saw Harlan's patrols twice, bands of armed riders sweeping the territory, but they never saw her. She was a shadow, a whisper in the tall grass. On the second night, she made camp on a ridge overlooking Willow Creek. Through her father's spyglass, she studied the town. It had grown since she was last there. Harlan's influence was everywhere. His brand, a stylized HD, was on the new saloon, the general store, even the sheriff's office. The number of armed men loitering on the streets had doubled. Harlan wasn't just building a ranch. He was building a kingdom. As darkness fell, she painted her face with the symbols Matthew had given her. She slipped into town under the cover of a moonless sky, moving from one deep shadow to the next. The livery stable was at the north end of town. A light burned in the small cabin attached to it. Through the window, she saw an old man with a ramrod straight back and a long white beard, meticulously cleaning a cavalry revolver. Samuel Wilson. She knocked once, a soft, deliberate tap, then melted back into the darkness. The door creaked open. Wilson held a lantern high. "Who's there?" he called out, his other hand resting on the butt of the gun tucked into his belt. "A friend of James Blackwood." Emily's voice came from the shadows. Wilson stiffened. "James has few friends left in this town. Harlan's seen to that. Show yourself." Emily stepped into the golden circle of lantern light. Wilson's eyes widened. The war paint, the buckskin, the fierce determination in her eyes. He saw the ghost of his old friend in her face. "Good Lord," he whispered. "Emily, we all thought you were dead." "That was the plan," she said. He ushered her inside, barring the door behind them. "What happened? We heard Cole's men burned you out." Instead of answering, Emily drew the knife her grandfather had forged from a fallen star. The strange symbols etched into the blade seemed to dance in the lamplight. "My father said you'd know this." Wilson stared at the knife, his breath catching in his throat. "White Eagle's blade," he said, his voice thick with awe. "James told me the story. He told me everything." He looked up, his eyes meeting hers. "Why come to me? The sheriff is on Harlan's payroll," Emily finished for him, "along with the mayor and the judge. This town is a snake pit, and Harlan is the snake." Wilson let out a long, slow breath. You're right about that. But what can I do? I'm just an old stableman. I don't need an army, Emily said, her voice low and intense. I need a friend. I'm going after Cole. The men who left me for dead. Harlan can wait. Wilson studied her for a long moment. He saw the fire in her eyes, the unbending will. He saw James Blackwood staring back at him. You look just like him, he said with a heavy sigh. Damn his stubborn soul. He leaned forward. What's the plan? Emily told him. As she spoke, his expression shifted from doubt to grudging admiration, and finally to a grim sort of excitement. It's crazy, he said when she finished. Crazy enough it just might work. But even if you get Cole, you'll have Victor Harlan hunting you for the rest of your days. A cold, dangerous smile touched Emily's lips. Let him hunt. He'll find out what it feels like to be the prey. Outside, a wolf howled in the hills. It was a long, lonely sound, but to Emily it felt like an answer, a promise. The ancestors were watching. Tomorrow the hunt would begin, and Willow Creek would never be the same. The stagecoach that rolled into Willow Creek the next morning looked ordinary enough. Dusty, tired, and unremarkable. But the woman who stepped out of it was anything but. She was dressed in the finest Eastern fashion, a deep blue traveling dress that spoke of money and status. Her face was hidden behind an elegant veil, and she moved with a confidence that turned every head on the street. She swept into the Willow Creek Hotel, a porter trailing behind her, struggling with two large, expensive-looking trunks. Name, ma'am? The hotel clerk asked, his eyes wide. Margaret Caldwell, the woman replied. Her accent was crisp and clean, straight out of Boston. My father is William Caldwell of the Boston Mercantile Bank. I'm here to explore investment opportunities. The clerk nearly fell over himself. Eastern investors. Harlan had been trying to lure them for months. Our finest suite is available, Miss Caldwell, he stammered, sliding the register toward her. I understand Mr. Victor Harlan is the most prominent businessman in the area, she said, signing the book with a flourish. I'll need to arrange a meeting. Of course, Miss Caldwell. I'm sure he'll be delighted. Once she was alone in her suite, Margaret Caldwell locked the door. Emily Blackwood ripped off the suffocating veil and hat. The dress came from the trunk of Samuel Wilson's late wife. The Boston accent came from hours of practice, mimicking Wilson, who had served with a Massachusetts regiment in the war. The short, chestnut-brown hair was her own creation, dyed with plant extracts Matthew had shown her. She opened the first trunk. Beneath a layer of fine dresses lay her buckskin tunic, the star-metal knife, and her father's fully loaded revolver. The second trunk held something even more dangerous: documents. The night before, Wilson had taken her to see a man named Franklin Hayes, a retired judge, a man whose ranch had been stolen by Harlan a year earlier. Hayes had kept meticulous records of Harlan's crimes, witness statements, evidence that had mysteriously vanished, a detailed account of the campaign of terror that had allowed Harlan to build his empire. This must end in a federal court, the old judge had told her, his eyes burning with a hunger for justice. Not just a bullet. Emily had given her word, but she knew that men like Jackson Cole only understood one language. A knock at the door made her jump. She quickly covered the trunk. Yes? Telegram for Miss Caldwell. She opened the door to a young boy. She tipped him a silver dollar. Margaret Caldwell would be known for her generosity, and tore open the envelope. The message was from Wilson. Father informed. Arriving tomorrow noon. Proceed with caution. Her father was coming. A wave of relief washed over her, quickly followed by a knot of apprehension. Would he even recognize the woman she had become? There was no time to worry. She had a role to play. She made her way to the Willow Creek Saloon. The moment she walked in, the place went quiet. All eyes were on the mysterious, wealthy woman from the East. And then she saw him, sitting at a corner table. Jackson Cole. He looked up as she passed, his eyes lingering on her, a predator's casual assessment. There was no flicker of recognition. To him, she was just another woman, another potential conquest. Her hand instinctively went to where her knife should be. She forced it to relax. She took a table near his, close enough to overhear, and ordered a pot of tea, much to the bartender's confusion. Shipment from Fort Worth, Cole was saying to the man beside him. Harlan wants it handled discreetly. What if Blackwood gets wind of it? The other man asked. Cole snorted. Blackwood? The marshal's been chasing his own tail for weeks. Besides, if he shows his face here, Sheriff Taylor has orders to lock him up on some trumped-up charge. People hear he's half Comanche and think he's some kind of spirit tracker. He's just a man. He bleeds like anyone else. Emily sipped her tea, a cold fire burning in her gut. Let them underestimate him, she thought. It will be the last mistake they ever make. Just then, a shadow fell over her table. Miss Caldwell, a smooth voice asked. I'm Victor Harlan. He was older than she expected, in his 50s, with a weathered face but wearing a suit that cost more than her cabin and land combined. His smile was perfectly practiced, but it never reached his cold, calculating eyes. Mr. Harlan, Emily said, inclining her head, your reputation precedes you. I hope in a good way, he said, sitting down. I understand you've been very successful in your acquisitions, Emily replied, her voice laced with meaning. Progress requires a firm hand, Miss Caldwell, he said smoothly. Perhaps you'd allow me to give you a tour of my ranch tomorrow morning? Before the cattle auction. I think you'll be impressed. It was the perfect opportunity, a look inside the belly of the beast. I would be delighted. Their conversation was cut short by a commotion at the door. A young cowhand burst in, his face pale. Mr. Harlan, rustlers! They cut the wire on the north pasture. Drove off 30 head. Harlan's mask of civility vanished. Cole! He barked. Cole and his men were already on their feet, heading for the door. The rustling was a diversion, of course, one orchestrated by Samuel Wilson and a few ranchers loyal to Judge Hayes. It would draw Cole and his most dangerous men out of town and leave Harlan vulnerable. How unfortunate, Emily murmured to Harlan. A minor inconvenience, Harlan said, his smile tight and strained. He tipped his hat. Until tomorrow, Miss Caldwell. As he rushed out, Emily finished her tea. The game had begun. She had played her first piece. And now, under the cover of the chaos she had created, it was time to make her next move. Night fell on a tense Willow Creek. The town was a powder keg, and everyone knew it. Harlan's men were gone, chasing ghosts in the hills. But the fear they left behind was a physical presence on the empty streets. In her hotel room, Emily shed the disguise of Margaret Caldwell. She pulled on dark, practical clothes, braided her hair, and smudged dirt on her face to cut the moonlight's reflection. She was a shadow again, a hunter. Her target, the marshal's office. According to Wilson, Sheriff Taylor kept all of Harlan's dirty secrets locked away in a large safe. Forged deeds, including the one for her own land. Proof. She slipped in through an unlocked back window, silent as smoke. The office was empty, moonlight striping the floor through the barred windows of the jail cells. The safe stood against the far wall, a black, hulking beast. Matthew had taught her this too. Not just fighting and tracking, but the art of listening. Every lock has a voice, he had told her, his fingers dancing over the intricate workings of a trapper's box. You just have to learn its language. She knelt, pressing her ear to the cold steel. She turned the dial, slowly, listening for the faintest click, the subtle shift of the tumblers. The minutes stretched on. Sweat beaded on her forehead. Click. The heavy door swung open. Inside were stacks of paper, bags of gold, and a leather-bound ledger with Harlan's personal cipher on the cover. She ignored the money. She grabbed the deeds and the ledger. This was the weapon she needed, the proof that would bring Harlan's empire crashing down. She was just about to close the safe when a floorboard creaked behind her. She froze. I wouldn't, a slow voice drawled. She turned. A man stood in the doorway, a revolver aimed at her chest. It was Marcus, the man who had been with Cole in the saloon. His eyes widened as he recognized her in the moonlight. Well, I'll be damned, he whispered. You're supposed to be dead. Disappointed? Emily asked, her body coiled like a spring. Surprised, he admitted. Cole doesn't usually leave a job unfinished. He gestured with the gun. Stand up. Slow. Emily rose, the ledger clutched in one hand. You can't win, Marcus said, a note of genuine curiosity in his voice. Even with that ledger, Harlan owns this whole territory. Justice doesn't always wear a badge, Emily replied. Understanding dawned in his eyes. That rustling? A diversion? He almost smiled. Smart, but not smart enough. He frowned, confused for just a split second by her lack of fear. It was all the time she needed. In a single fluid motion, she drew the star metal knife and threw it. The blade flew true, burying itself in his shoulder. He screamed, his gun going off, the bullet splintering the desk beside her as she launched herself across the room. Before he could recover, she delivered a sharp, precise blow to his throat. He crumpled, gagging, and she had his gun before he hit the floor. She tied him up with rope from the marshal's desk and locked him in one of his own cells. "You're making a mistake," he wheezed. "You can't fight him alone." Emily retrieved her knife, wiping it clean on his shirt. "Who said I'm alone?" she whispered and melted back into the night. By the time Marcus was discovered, her father would be riding into town. The board was set. The pieces were in motion. Tomorrow the storm would break over Willow Creek. The next morning, Victor Harland arrived at the hotel looking like a king surveying his domain. He found Margaret Caldwell waiting for him, dressed in an elegant riding habit, looking every bit the part of a wealthy heiress. "I trust you slept well?" he asked, his smile back in place. "Tolerably," Emily replied in her Boston accent. "Though I was disturbed by some commotion, was your little rustling problem resolved?" A flicker of annoyance crossed Harlan's face. "My men are tracking them. A minor inconvenience." He didn't know that Wilson's men had used every Comanche trick Emily had taught them, leaving a trail that led nowhere. Cole was chasing the wind. They rode out to his ranch, a sprawling mansion that looked like it had been ripped out of the Virginia countryside and dropped onto the Texas plains. It was a monument to greed, built on the ruins of smaller ranches. "Water is the real currency out here, Miss Caldwell," Harlan boasted, gesturing to the stream that flowed through his land, a stream that originated on Emily's property. "Control the water, you control everything." "A philosophy that has served you well," Emily said, her voice a perfect mask of polite interest. "Progress," Harlan said with a dismissive wave of his hand, "demands sacrifice." The tour ended on a veranda overlooking the main corrals. As they drank lemonade, Emily played her next card. "I hear a U.S. Marshal is due in town today," she said casually. "A Mr. Blackwood. Is that unusual?" Harlan's hand froze halfway to his mouth. "Where did you hear that?" "Hotel gossip," Emily said with an innocent shrug. "Blackwood is a nuisance," Harlan said, his voice tight. "A man who doesn't understand progress. He's just a man with a badge, and men can be reasoned with." Just then, a rider came thundering toward the ranch house. It was one of the Daniels brothers, his face pale with panic. "Mr. Harland," he gasped. "It's Marcus. Someone found him locked in a cell. The safe. It's been emptied. The deeds. Your private ledger. It's all gone." Harlan's face turned a dark, furious red. "The ledger?" he whispered, his voice shaking with rage. "Marcus said it was a woman," Daniels stammered. "Dark-haired. He said she moved like an Indian." Harlan's eyes snapped to Emily. For a terrifying second, she saw suspicion flicker there. But he was too consumed by his rage, his panic. He couldn't connect the elegant woman from Boston with the ghost who had robbed him blind. He seemed to remember she was there, and forced his face into a strained smile. "My apologies, Miss Caldwell. A security issue. We should return to town." The ride back was tense and silent. As they crested the last hill overlooking Willow Creek, Harlan reined in his horse. Below them, a single rider was dismounting in front of the sheriff's office. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a black duster and a silver star that glinted in the sun. James Blackwood had arrived. "Right on schedule," Harlan muttered. His face was a mask of pure hatred. He turned to Emily. "An urgent matter has come up. My foreman will see you back to the hotel." He spurred his horse, galloping toward a confrontation, leaving Emily with an escort. The foreman, a weary-looking man named Quinn, rode beside her in silence for a moment. "You picked an interesting time to visit, ma'am," he said finally. "The boss and the marshal. They've been circling each other like wolves for years." "What do you think will happen?" Emily asked. Quinn shrugged. "Ain't my place to think. But I'll tell you this. You might want to stay in your room this afternoon. This town is about to get real unpleasant. He was right. Back in her hotel room, Emily watched from the window as Harlan's men started gathering on the street. They were armed for war. A soft knock came at her door. She opened it a crack. It was a hotel maid, holding an envelope. "A message for you, ma'am." It was from Wilson. "Father detained. Cole knows. Coming for you. Backstairs." At that exact moment, shouting erupted from the street. Jackson Cole and 4 of his men were storming toward the hotel entrance. They knew. Her cover was blown. She grabbed the ledger and her weapons. The disguise of Margaret Caldwell was left behind like a shed skin. She was Emily Blackwood again. No, she was more than that. She was the hunter. She slipped out the back, moving down the service stairs just as boots thundered up from the lobby. She emerged into a back alley, pressing herself into a doorway as one of Harlan's men burst out. He didn't see her. She moved like a snake striking, an arm around his throat, a hand over his mouth. A precise pressure point Matthew had taught her. The man went limp without a sound. She took his gun and melted back into the alleys, heading for the abandoned cooperage at the edge of town. The emergency meeting point Wilson had designated. The town was an armed camp. Harlan's men were everywhere. She was almost there when a figure stepped out, blocking her path. The older Daniel's brother, a shotgun cradled in his arms, and a slow, cruel smile of recognition spreading across his face. "Well now," he drawled, his eyes gleaming. "Look what we have here. Back from the dead. Cole's going to be real happy to see you." The alley was a trap, too narrow to run, too close to dodge a shotgun blast. Daniels leveled the weapon, the twin barrels looking like 2 dark, empty eyes. "Harlan wants you gone for good this time," he said. "Nothing personal." "It became personal when you burned my home," Emily said, her voice dangerously calm. "When you watched Cole stab me and left me to bleed out in the dirt." A flicker of something, maybe shame, maybe just annoyance, crossed his face. "Should have just sold the land, girl." "This ends now," Emily said. "You're right about that," he sneered, thumbing back the hammer. "Last chance. Any final words?" Emily held his gaze. "Just one," she said. "Look behind you." The oldest trick in the book, but in the tense silence of the alley, it worked. He hesitated. His eyes flickered over her shoulder for a fraction of a second. It was the only opening she would get. Her hand moved in a blur, not for her gun, but for a small leather pouch at her belt. In one fluid motion, she flung a handful of fine, gray powder directly into his face. It was a mixture of dried herbs and ground-up minerals Matthew had given her. A flash powder, he'd called it. Not deadly, but debilitating. Daniel screamed as the powder hit his eyes, a searing, blinding pain. The shotgun went off, blasting a hole in the dirt floor as he clawed at his face. Emily was on him in an instant. A knee to the stomach, a sharp chop to the throat. He collapsed, gagging and sightless. "That was for the Petersons," she whispered, taking his shotgun and binding him with his own belt. The gunshot would bring the rest of them running. She had to move. She reached the cooperage, the old barrel-making factory at the edge of town. The huge front door was ajar. A warning sign. Wilson would never have been so careless. She crept closer, peering through a crack in the weathered wood, and her blood ran cold. Samuel Wilson was tied to a chair in the middle of the room. His face was a bloody mess, and standing over him, calmly lighting a cigar, was Jackson Cole. "Tell me where she is, old man," Cole said, his voice a low growl, "and I might let you live." Wilson spat a wad of blood onto the floor. "Go to hell, Cole." The sound of a fist hitting flesh. Wilson's grunt of pain. Emily's hand tightened on her knife. There were 4 of them in there. The odds were impossible. A direct assault would be suicide, and Wilson would be the first to die. She needed a plan. She needed... A hand clamped over her mouth from behind. An arm of steel wrapped around her waist, lifting her off her feet. She fought, driving her elbow back, but it was like hitting a stone wall. A familiar voice, a voice she hadn't heard in nearly a year, whispered in her ear. "Easy, little eagle. It's me." She froze. She turned and looked into the piercing blue eyes of her father, James Blackwood. "You're supposed to be in jail," she whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. A rare smile touched his lips. "Harlan's men aren't as smart as he thinks they are." His smile faded as he took in her appearance. The war paint, the knife, the cold fire in her eyes. Matthew sent word. I came as fast as I could. I couldn't wait, she said simply. I know, he said, his voice softening. Later. First, we get our friend back. He peered through the crack, his mind working with the cold, tactical precision that had made him a legend. Back entrance, he murmured. I'll circle around. When you hear the hawks cry, create a distraction. Loud, but do not engage. He melted into the shadows, moving with a Comanche silence that defied his size. Emily waited, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Inside, Cole was losing his patience. The girl is finished, he snarled at Wilson. She's one woman against an army. Why are you protecting her? Wilson coughed, then laughed, a raw, bloody sound. You still don't get it, do you? It was never just about Emily. It's about this town. It's about not letting men like you and Harlan win. Noble, Cole sneered. I'll carve it on your tombstone. Then she heard it. Cree, cree, cree. The sharp, piercing cry of a hawk, her father's signal. Emily took a small clay sphere from her pouch, another of Matthew's gifts. She struck it against the wall, activating the chemicals inside, and tossed it through the open door. The sphere shattered, releasing a thick, choking cloud of reddish smoke. Shouts and curses erupted from inside. What the hell is that? The front door flew open and one of Harlan's men stumbled out, his eyes streaming. Emily was on him in an instant, a single silent blow that dropped him like a sack of grain. She took his revolver. Inside was chaos. The smoke was so thick she could barely see. A figure lunged at her out of the haze. She fired. A man screamed and fell. Behind you, Wilson yelled. She spun just as Jackson Cole burst from the smoke, his face a mask of fury. Recognition flared in his eyes. You, he roared, raising his gun. Emily dove, the world exploding in a deafening roar, as Cole's bullet tore through the air where she'd been standing. She hit the dirt floor, rolled, and came up firing, the stolen revolver bucking in her hand. Her shots weren't aimed to kill, but to drive him back, to keep him guessing in the swirling, acrid smoke. From the back of the cooperative, she heard the sickening crunch of bone, a heavy thud, and then her father's voice cutting through the chaos. Emily, get Wilson, now! She scrambled to Wilson's side, slicing through his ropes with the star metal knife. The old man was slumped in the chair, but his eyes were clear and defiant. Told you he'd come, Wilson wheezed, a bloody grin on his face. Can you walk? She asked, helping him up. He swayed, but his legs held. Been through worse. Go. Help your father. Another gunshot cracked from the back of the building, followed by a grunt of pain that tore through Emily's heart. Father, go! Wilson shoved her forward. I'll cover the door. Emily plunged back into the smoke, her knife in one hand, the revolver in the other. She found them in a small storage room. Her father was locked in a brutal struggle with the second Daniel's brother. James was winning, but blood was soaking the sleeve of his duster. As Emily moved to help, the floorboard under her foot groaned. The sound was just enough of a distraction. Daniels broke free, driving a knee into her father's wounded arm. As he scrambled for his dropped gun, Emily closed the distance in 2 silent strides and brought the butt of her revolver down hard on the back of his head. He collapsed without a sound. Nice timing, James grunted, clutching his arm. Where's Cole? Vanished, Emily said, quickly examining the wound. It was a nasty graze, but the bullet had gone clean through. She ripped a strip from her shirt and tied a makeshift bandage. They moved back into the main room. The smoke was clearing. Wilson stood guard at the door. No sign of Cole, he reported, but the whole town's stirring. Harlan's men are gathering. James's eyes swept the area, his mind already 3 steps ahead. The jail, he said. It's defensible, and I can telegraph for federal reinforcements. Harlan owns the sheriff, Emily reminded him. A grim smile touched her father's lips. Sheriff Taylor is currently indisposed in one of his own cells. He looked at the ledger she was still clutching. We need to get this to Judge Hayes. Cole will be waiting for us, Wilson warned. Let him, James said, his voice hard as iron. We're not running anymore. They slipped out the back, Emily leading the way through the labyrinth of alleys she had memorized. They were almost to the jail when their path was blocked. Victor Harlan stood at the end of the alley, flanked by 4 of his men. He looked calm, almost bored, but the revolver in his hand was rock steady. "Blackwood," he said with a nod. "And Miss Blackwood. A truly remarkable performance. Had things been different, I might have offered you a job." "Your reign of terror is over, Harlan," James said, his voice deceptively calm. Harlan laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "You still don't get it, do you, Marshal? There is no law here but mine." He gestured to his men. "Take them." As they moved forward, an arrow hissed out of the sky and buried itself in the shoulder of the lead gunman. On the roof of the general store, a figure stood up, Matthew Running Elk, a Winchester rifle now in his hands, looking like an avenging spirit. Before Harlan could react, another figure stepped out from a side passage. Judge Hayes holding a shotgun. "The people have had enough of you, Harlan." Then more appeared. Ranchers Harlan had ruined. Storekeepers he had extorted. The entire town armed with whatever they could find, their faces set with a grim, long-overdue fury. Harlan's men looked at the sea of angry faces, then at Harlan, and their loyalty evaporated. They dropped their guns and raised their hands. "Cowards!" Harlan screamed, his composure finally shattering. "Traitors!" Just then, a rifle cracked from the far end of the alley. Jackson Cole. "Down!" James yelled, tackling Emily and Wilson to the ground as bullets chewed the wood above their heads. In the chaos, Harlan made a break for it, running toward Cole. "He's getting away!" Emily yelled, scrambling to her feet. James grabbed her arm. "No! Cole is too dangerous!" "This ends now," she said, her voice an icy whisper. She looked her father in the eye. "You get Harlan. Cole is mine." He saw the unbending warrior spirit in her eyes, the same spirit that lived in him. He let her go. "Be careful, daughter." Emily didn't look back. She slipped into the shadows, her senses on fire, tracking the man who had tried to murder her. The trail led to the livery stable. He was in there, waiting, an ambush. But he was expecting the girl he'd left for dead. He wasn't ready for the hunter she had become. She scaled the outside wall, silent as a cat, and peered through a gap in the hayloft. Cole was below, his back to a post, his rifle aimed at the main door. She dropped a small stone into the straw near the horses. They snorted, shifting nervously. Cole glanced toward the sound for just a second. Emily dropped from the rafters, landing silently on a stack of hay bales behind him. "Come on out, girl," Cole called out, his voice laced with arrogant confidence. "Let's finish this." He thought she was outside. He had no idea she was already in the room. She launched herself off the hay, a silent, descending shadow. He spun around, his eyes wide with shock. A fraction of a second too late. She crashed into him, her momentum driving him to the ground, his rifle skittering away into the darkness. They rolled across the dusty floor, a tangle of limbs and fury. He was stronger, but she was faster, more fluid. She pressed the star metal knife to his throat. "Remember me now?" she hissed. He snarled, a cornered animal, and with a surge of brute strength, he threw her off. He scrambled to his feet, a long, wicked Bowie knife appearing in his hand. "That cabin of yours," he taunted, circling her. "It burned real pretty." They danced a deadly ballet in the dim light of the stable. Blades flashed. He was a brawler, relying on power. She was a warrior, using precision and economy of motion. He lunged. She sidestepped, the tip of his blade slicing the air where her heart had been. "Harlan never told you about the spring, did he?" she said, pressing him, forcing him onto the defensive. "The reason he wanted my land so badly." "Don't care," he grunted, sweat beading on his forehead. "Job's a job." "He used you," Emily said, her voice cutting like her blade. "Men like Harlan always do." The words hit their mark. Rage flashed in his eyes and he charged, a wild, sloppy attack. She flowed around him like water, and as he stumbled past, her grandfather's knife found the space beneath his ribs, the exact same spot where he had stabbed her. His eyes went wide with shock. The Bowie knife fell from his hand. He sank to his knees, clutching the wound, a look of disbelief on his face. "How?" he gasped, blood bubbling on his lips. Emily stood over him, her face a mask of cold justice. "I told you," she said quietly. "You didn't know who I was." She knelt beside him as the life drained from his eyes. She felt no triumph, only a quiet, solemn finality. The circle was closed. She rose, wiping her blade clean. Outside, the sounds of the battle for Willow Creek still raged. Her father needed her. As she stepped out of the stable, blinking in the harsh sunlight, she was no longer a victim seeking revenge. She was a deputy, reporting for duty. When Emily emerged, the battle was nearly over. Harlan and his last few loyalists were barricaded inside the bank, using Sheriff Taylor as a human shield. Her father was directing the townsfolk, a seasoned general commanding his citizen army. "Cole is finished," Emily said, her voice cutting through the noise. James looked at his daughter, at the blood on her cheek that wasn't hers, at the unyielding strength in her eyes, and simply nodded. He understood. Suddenly, the bank doors flew open. Harlan dragged the terrified sheriff out onto the steps. "Blackwood!" he screamed, his face wild with desperation. "Call off your mob, or he dies." "It's over, Victor," James called back. "There's no way out." "I'll see you in hell first," Harlan shrieked. In his rage, his grip on the sheriff loosened for a moment. Taylor, seeing his one chance, threw his weight backwards, knocking Harlan off balance. Harlan recovered instantly, leveling his revolver, not at the fleeing sheriff, but straight at James and Emily. "If I'm going down," he roared, "I'm taking you with me." 3 shots cracked as one. One from James's Colt, one from Emily's stolen revolver, and one from Matthew's rifle, high on the hotel roof. Harlan staggered back, a look of shocked surprise on his face. He collapsed onto the dusty street, his empire of greed and fear dying with him. A deep silence fell over Willow Creek. Then a single cheer broke the quiet, followed by another, and another until the whole town was roaring, a wave of relief and triumph. It was over. In the days that followed, Willow Creek began to heal. Federal marshals arrived, armed with Harlan's ledger, and started dismantling his corrupt network across the territory. The land he had stolen was returned. The people he had terrorized were finally free. Emily stood one evening with her father amid the ashes of her cabin. Nature was already reclaiming the scorched earth, with tiny wildflowers pushing up through the black soil. "Are you going to rebuild?" James asked. Emily looked at the silver deputy's badge he had offered her, which she now wore pinned to her coat. "I think so," she said, "but not just for me." The spring that Harlan had killed for was designated as a public trust, its water shared equally among all the ranchers in the valley, a symbol of the new community they were building. Emily Blackwood had found her purpose. She wasn't just the homesteader's daughter or the Comanche chief's granddaughter anymore. She was both, a warrior and a lawwoman walking in 2 worlds and stronger for it. She had faced the fire and emerged not burned but forged. The outlaws who left her for dead thought they were extinguishing a flame. But what they didn't know, what they could never have understood, was that they were just scattering the embers. And from those embers, a wildfire of justice had been born. If you enjoyed this story, make sure you're subscribed, because we've got a story coming up that you absolutely will not want to miss. Hit that notification bell, and we'll see you in the next one.